Okay, thanks. Hey, what's going on, guys? Meteorologist Jonathan Kagas alongside meteorologist David Nazario. We are back again to talk, of course, about Helene, a hurricane that's unfortunately, quote, getting that look. And it's been trying to come together a little bit today. Thankfully, it's what do I want to say? Struggling a little bit today. I mean, thankfully, but we don't think that's going to last. So in this live stream, Nazario and I are going to break down what the storm is doing, some of the science, meteorology on why this thing is likely going to potentially go nuts overnight. And then we're going to talk about some of the impacts to Central Florida, which on the tropical storm variety, but then major hurricane likely for the Big Bend and Panhandle of Florida, David.
Yes, correct, Jonathan. In fact, for those of you who may not be aware, we had the 5 o'clock track update from National Hurricane Center, and they have officially crossed from the Category 3 to the Category 4 threshold. Now, as Jonathan already explained, we have a little bit of luck on our side right now. It looks like Helene is still struggling with a little bit of the dry air that she bit off earlier this afternoon, so that is helping to keep that intensification phase tamed to an extent. We are still slowly deepening, but thankfully that sinking dry air from the Yucatan has worked its way into that core. And you can see that overnight yesterday it looked a little more impressive than we do now. We're looking a little bit more a la Francine, if you guys remember that storm a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, and Francine, as bad as it was for parts of the deep south and southeast, it did suck in a lot of dry air. The difference there, it was never able to kind of close its core around to fend it off. Helene is going to try to do that. We hope it somehow doesn't, but you already kind of see over the last few frames on the northern side anyway, that green kind of going away and starting to get more of those towers to pop back up on the northern side. We'll see if it completely wraps it around. We'll have to check the latest Hurricane Hunter data in there as well to see what they're seeing if it's closing off. But I mean, once the thing closes off, it's going to be there's not going to be anything to stop it until it gets to land, pretty much.
No, exactly. Looking at that satellite image, it's definitely doing better for itself than it was earlier this afternoon. To the naked eye, looking at a visible or a true color visible shot, you could see a clear channel of dry air wrapping around like a pinwheel, if you will, right to the center of circulation. We no longer have that. And as Jonathan had mentioned, we're already seeing some strong cumulonimbus tops there, those white colors closest to where the low center of pressure is beginning to fire up. It's 8:30 in the evening Eastern Standard Time, so we're just getting underway with the diurnal maximum, as I'm sure you've heard us use on our live streams a number of times at this point. So we're going to have to see. This is going to be very pivotal. Tonight truly is the night. If this system is going to bomb out and achieve major hurricane status, it will need to do so before we see the sun come up tomorrow, because then, thankfully, if it doesn't, it seems like we may be out of that realm in terms of
Yeah.
just extensive rapid intensification that NHC is unfortunately predicting.
Yeah, we're gonna have to see. I mean, morning will tell all. We always kind of talk about, what it looks like in the morning, because it does these things are the opposite of the daily thunderstorms, as we always talk about. Gets their instability at night when you cool things from the top down over the warm ocean water as well. April had mentioned that she's gonna have to evacuate because of some of the surge. So Ron says, I heard there's a hurricane going to curve in by Horseshoe Beach. That's the understatement of the evening for sure. Yeah, I mean, we were. I hope that that's kind of sarcasm. You can get one over me fast, but I hope that's the case, and I hope by this time everybody in the impacted areas, Horseshoe Beach is one of them, that you're making sure that you're taking this seriously. For those that are just joining, I want to kind of give a timeline for the entire state of Florida. This is one of our favorite models to use. This is kind of our in-house model. It does very, very well with southward to northward moving storms. It actually was the furthest west of all of the storms in range, and this goes out to about 60 hours. But nonetheless, it did very well with Ian in 22. It caught that hook, and it did very well with Charlie back in 2004 with that super aggressive right hook. So here's the deal. This is 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And from a Florida Peninsula standpoint, so if you're watching from the greater Central Florida area on News 6 Plus, on the clickorlando.com YouTube stream, or on Just Weather, or hanging out on clickorlando.com, the thing we want to tell you here is it's not going to be an all day rain. So don't expect, like, almost like an and certainly the intensity for Central Florida is not going to be anywhere close to what we saw in 22. But just like for the example of, it's not going to be an all day thing. We're going to be dealing with the outer bands that at times it might just be cloudy, windy, and then you get this gnarly band coming through of maybe some thunder. Sometimes you don't even have thunder in the outer bands, but I mean, then you get those 40, 50, maybe even up to 60 mile per hour wind gusts for a little bit of time. And then that's whenever we're also going to be watching for those tropical tornadoes. Look at this as we send this to the early afternoon. Kind of skip past the time frame that I wanted to show you. I'm going to go back to that because we were talking about this last night on the live stream. It's those guys right there. That's going to be about the time. Late afternoon, early evening. It's what, between like 2 and 6, you think, for like the Central Florida area, from Marion County into Brevard, Polk, Osceola, Seminole, Volusia, Flagler, Lake, Sumter. That band right there is going to be the band, for lack of a better term.
For sure, in full agreement. You can just see that it's got that textbook look to it. We have the bean-shaped features there, those isolated cells that are of themselves, they're individualized throughout those feeder bands as they wrap in with the environmental flow. So there's a difference. You have the storm's motion in whichever direction it's going, a lot more tornado potential or tornado inducing, if anything. I do think as we a lot more tornado potential or tornado inducing, if anything. I do think as we go through tomorrow afternoon, maybe even closer to the lunch hour down towards southwest Florida, getting up into Sarasota before making it into Tampa Bay, our water spout potential is probably going to start going up. And then as we get closer to max heating of the day, as those individualized bands come through, we're naturally going to see the daytime heating in between the cloud cover try to further enhance the lift, the instability that's over the peninsula itself. You can see here, Jonathan read my mind. Storm Prediction Center is going with a level 2 out of 5 risk for much of our viewing area and a level 3 out of 5 risk for southeast Georgia and the southernmost periphery of South Carolina for not only your overall severe weather threat, but especially those tornadoes that we're more or less very concerned about on the leading edge and on the right side of this system.
Yeah, we can go back and look at the satellite. We have some comments. Looks a bit disheveled, but pressure is still dropping. That's the key. A lot of the times, you have to use the microwave imagery to see if there's a core, or the tail Doppler radar on the NOAA planes to see if that core is there, because that's really what we're looking for at this point. And this is a good point too. And we're going to take a look at this in the live stream as well. He says, "Well, I'm getting flooding here in my area, in North Carolina." Wow, it's a yes, then no. So the deal with that's that PRE, the pre that we call it, the predecessor rain event leading up to the hurricane itself coming through. And that's the thing. I was actually just looking at some of the reports coming through. There is a lot of flooding being reported in the mountains, and this is kind of the appetizer to the main course of the heavy rain that's coming. So there could be, when we talk about devastating, and I know I put out a video earlier and there were already some trolls on it as well, that overblowing the situation, and we can get into that in another time. I just can't, there's no time for that at this point. Certainly we saw that leading up to this storm, but it's right there on satellite now. There's nothing but warm water ahead of it. You need to take this storm seriously. And I always say your local officials are going to know the best. Listen to them. If they tell you to leave, if they tell you to do something, please listen to them. That's all I have to say right off the bat here as we get going.
Completely. And like Jonathan was saying, the appetizer to the main entree. If you look down there in the lower left-hand corner, we have the Tallahassee cam pulled up out of FIU, and it looks like it's raining pretty good out there, and the storm is still well to our south. So these precursor showers and storms, especially as intense as some of the rain rates that we've seen with just our garden variety sea breeze and onshore flow for us here in the peninsula and across Georgia, the Carolinas, with that frontal system that's actually helping to influence Helene towards the north and into the Big Bend area, this is only going to further saturate the environment to where all the rain that Helene is going to bring up, mixing with that upper low we talked about for those of you who caught our stream yesterday, that's going to spin it back to the west up over Tennessee and Kentucky. It's going to keep a lot of that rainfall more or less marinating over that region, the southeast corner of the United States. Everybody, once again, is going to feel this storm. And unfortunately, the water, regardless of where you are, whether you live on the immediate coast or well inland after the storm has made landfall, the rain, the water in one way, shape, or form is going to be the biggest threat here.
No doubt about that. And we're going to be watching that closely, especially for I 75 in Florida through the Big Bend. The one thing here is, and I think it's a lot of people are going to be like, oh, it's just an afternoon thunderstorm. And I do believe for Central Florida, that's literally what it's going to be. By the way, that live view of Tallahassee is brought to you by WeatherStem. We're going to be showing off their cameras across the state of Florida as I keep wanting to call this a dahlia because the track is so similar to this because of Helene
Very much
moving.
so, yeah.
It's crazy. We were talking about this, I think, on the live stream where I was off, how this has been this area that historically doesn't really see the hurricanes has now been the magnet over the past 2 or 3 years. And even if you want to take it back further, 2018, Michael kind of got this started. I think there's some lightning going on that camera in Tallahassee. I'll
Looks
bring
like
up
it, yeah.
bring up the radar in check, but Michael obviously not into the bay. But nonetheless, it was close just on the other side of the bay. Let me just get to the lightning tracker here. Yep, there you go. That's all the lightning around Tallahassee. I'll get to the Tallahassee radar and see what's going on up there. Oh yeah. And that's the thing, like all of this is heavy. This isn't technically the outer bands just yet. We're watching I mean, there's all the lightning associated with some of the banding features of Helene. You can't see it out there. It is there. I wish it could, for all the Marvel fans out there, it can be like Thanos snapped and go away, but it's just because the radar can't, it can only see about 100 to 125 miles away. So it's there. Watch what happens when we go back to the satellite view again, because we're using the infrared satellite, the visible satellite, you need the daytime, but there it is on satellite. And again, and the next couple of hours, you can see the towers popping. If it closes off and fends itself off from the drier air, I mean, I would love it if it happens just like Francine did, and it just sucked in that air and was never able to get going. I mean, it was still a formidable storm, of course, but still, was never really projected to be like what this one is forecast to be.
No, and National Hurricane Center, for those of you who aren't aware, I'm not in the Central Florida area. I'm up here in Virginia operating with the Fleet Weather Center, the Navy up here. And we thankfully have the opportunity to kind of telecon in with National Hurricane Center as we orchestrate our forces down there in the Gulf and get them out of harm's way. And NHC, they're just as conservative as we are. They're trying to avoid pushing this thing to its peak, pushing it to maximum velocity, if you will. Every discussion I've listened in on, they want to remain conservative. They're hoping that something will get up in there and distort this feature, just as the comment earlier said, make it look all disheveled, not give it a fighting chance. And it seems as if every time they go in with reconnaissance, every time they sample the local environment, they sample the storm itself. That's why slowly but surely, if you probably have been watching the updates at 11, at 5, every time we get a new track, they slowly give it that fateful nudge to major hurricane status. And now again, we just recently crossed over to category 4 status. And they're not solely going off of the models. That's another thing too. We got to be careful just putting all our eggs into one basket with a model runner too. They're looking at all this wonderful analysis data real time that they're getting from their aircraft out there. That's why they're doing the missions that they are. And so unfortunately, as Jonathan had mentioned earlier, we got to make sure that we're respecting this situation. We're listening to local and state law enforcement, emergency services. I know that there's mandatory and voluntary evacuations out there. This is not the point where you should be thinking about preparing. I hate to say it. And if you're one of those people watching to where, okay, maybe now's the time, no, that time has come and gone. This is we've crossed zero barrier, as I've said before. This is where we're just counting down. We should be sheltered in place at this point.
Absolutely, yeah. You are. The time is running out. I'm sure that everything is busy, and you know how the drill goes when you're talking about these storms. I want to talk about some of the local impacts here. And again, for those that are tuning in from the greater Central Florida area, and if you do want to stay updated on the storm yesterday, we're going to be starting our live stream tomorrow at noon Eastern time, and we're going to have a combination of live cameras, some meteorological insight from both David and myself, and some of the other meteorologists on the New 6 Pinpoint Weather Team, and kind of taking you around Central Florida, the Panhandle of Florida, Big Bend. So if you're interested in staying up to date with reliable information, wherever you're watching this stream, consider hitting that subscribe button. Love to have you part of the team again, see what's going on, and to report to us when you can do so safely, because you guys are kind of the eyes and ears in the field out there, and all that stuff. So we would appreciate that. We appreciate the support, and this is no hype central. I can't tell you. It works both ways. It's been nauseating over the past couple of days watching. It's gonna form. It's not gonna form. It's gonna form, and I think that's part of the problem on why. I'm hoping that there's some kind of that I'm just not getting the joke here. Then people are being sarcastic with me, which I'm sure people are, but but nonetheless, I hope so. I hope that everybody's taking this seriously. Is my point. And then Tallahassee, I mean,
Absolutely, as you should.
in Scott says Tallahassee is going to be ground zero. It very well could. That whole Perry area, depending upon how it wobbles, and then uh, that's at that point. The track has really been pretty much set in stone for what, 3 days now. I mean, there have been wobbles. It has gone a little bit further to the west in the Big Bend and back to the east. That is all. That is all the nature of the beast. Now we still will see those little wobbles as we typically do, especially with the stronger ones going up to the landfall point.
Yeah, and that's another thing I would like to touch on really quickly, just a very quick soapbox, if you guys don't mind, is the track. Far too often do we have a lot of unofficial sources out there kind of capturing and stealing the bandwidth for us official sources to kind of get the word out and get you the information, the results that you deserve before a critical threat like this. We have not once been reactive to a model run. We have not been reactive to a single observation. And I've been seeing a lot of comments out there, especially in previous live streams, Charlie, Ian, Wilma. It's coming for Central Florida. It's coming for Central Florida.
Mhm.
Truthfully, I would debate politely with Jonathan that the track's been locked in for a solid week, if not some change. Like the models really haven't, painted a far right shift, a far west shift. It's been Panhandle, Big Bend. We've gone away from the model runs that suddenly bring South Florida, Louisiana into it. Those were gone, I would say, a little over a week and some change ago. This has been pretty concrete, and you want to pay attention to that type of consistency when generating your forecast so you can comfortably tell your loved ones, friends, family alike, even your coworkers, your neighbors, that yes, it's more than likely going to be coming through this area. I just want to also touch on one person had asked, a couple of people actually, Tallahassee ground zero. Our track guidance, the projected path from NHC has actually been shifted just a bit further to the west at 5 o'clock. So, yes, Tallahassee, you should be fully ready to rock and roll, sheltered in place. We're going to roll the track here right now, and you can see where it's expected to come ashore. We'll put Tallahassee in that immediate right front quadrant. And as Jonathan mentioned, this is going to deviate. It does have the ability to wobble. These things don't
Mhm.
move in straight lines. But regardless, if you look at the cone here, it's starting to shrink. That confidence is going up. So Tallahassee, regardless of the wiggling and wobbling and the dancing that this thing may do, just be ready. The clock is ticking. You need to be sheltered and locked in a safe portion of your house as this comes in.
And we're also going to have a crew tomorrow reporting from Perry, which could be also very, very close to the landfall site. I want to show you here again the future radar, and then we're going to go into some county by county impacts for the greater Central Florida area, and then I'm going to show you the forecast wind speeds on this model. And again, I can't say it enough that this model did very, very well with Ian. The other thing, side note, there has been a lot of posts online, and David, you may have seen this showing the IBM graph model. I don't know if you've
Yeah,
seen
a
that,
lot of it. Somebody just
and
mentioned it in the chat.
no way. Okay, okay, so that's perfect. Somebody posted on our News Six Facebook page, and like, this thing is going to go to Cedar Key. What are you talking about? I just watched another news station. In my opinion, um, I mean, that model is like 200 miles to the east of the far eastern side of the official forecast cone. If that were to happen, I think we would have been seeing significant shifting already, not only with where the current storm is, but before that model is not really a hurricane model. I've used it before, didn't really like it. I think it's inappropriate for people to be sharing and showing that when clearly to call it an outlier is an understatement because that thing is so far out in left field, it's not even funny. But again, I don't know if it's to generate clicks or whatever because it was showing like 100-mile-per-hour gust through like I-75 and almost to I-4. Like, that's not going to happen. And obviously nothing's ever a guarantee in the weather world, but I mean, it would take something significant. And as David mentioned with the steering currents, we showed you this for the last couple of days. This thing is unfortunately had its sights set on the Big Bend from the start. And really, since the Euro, I mean, the Euro was out to lunch. We talked about that. What was it, 10 days ago? That was whenever you were still in town, pretty much, before you went to your
Yep.
duties, that the Euro was likely out to lunch. Because it's been terrible this year. So the Euro not always king. And neither is
Completely
the
agree.
graph.
Another little yeah.
That's the
Another little
jester.
side note. I don't know if we can still pull it up, Jonathan, but Selena Lorenzi in the chat made a wonderful comment. This is just to get information out since we have a little over 3,000 people watching. For those of you maybe in immediate harm's way and don't really have the capabilities of moving around, she mentions, please keep safe. Uber is giving free rides to shelters. That I feel is really good information to get out there, just in case you may not want to drive, you don't trust yourself. Personally, being a native Floridian, Jonathan, you can testify to this. I personally do not trust other drivers in bad weather.
Oh,
So,
heck
yeah, if
no.
you want to make
Oh,
sure to, yeah, exactly. If you want
trust
to
in the
get
good
somewhere
weather.
safe and you feel, yeah, and you feel you're out of options, guys, I'm sure that Uber is probably not the only one. I bet you anything that there's going to be other ride sharing opportunities out there to get you to safety. And that's what's critical right now. Even if you got to lose a little sleep tonight, make sure you are safe.
Hey, David, I have to run to do an 8 o'clock. What time is it? 9 o'clock. Wow. 9 o'clock cut in on News 6 WKMG. So I'm going to give you the keys. If you have a splash top open, or I'll just pull up the satellite or the track or something. I'll be a couple of minutes over there. Whatever you want. If you can't get splash top open to kind of get into the weather computer, so just let me know and I will pull it up for you.
Go ahead and run that satellite image, and I'll go ahead and take questions as best I can. This is probably a
Cool.
great opportunity since we have so many people in here. I'll just try to rapid fire get all that information out and talk to some folks.
That's perfect. All right. I'll see you guys in a little bit. Thank you.
Alrighty, everybody. So we're looking at the live satellite shot, and as a few of you already mentioned, yes, Helene is still battling that dry air. That dry air is in our corner, trying to be our best friend and shield us from the full extent of what this storm could do. So, if anything, let's go ahead and get some questions in the chat. I'm still on my personal laptop, so I do not have full control over the graphics. Unfortunately, we will go back over the threats here in a little bit. This is an extended live stream, but let's go ahead and talk a little bit. How's Panama City Beach look? Panama City is likely to be on the immediate west side of this system. Now, remember, it is the weaker side. You will likely see a little bit less in terms of the storm surge impact because you're going to be dealing with the offshore flow. Your winds will be predominantly out of the north. But because this is such a big hurricane, you will still realize high end tropical storm. Pretty solid chance you're going to see hurricane force conditions for at least a small window of time that will be sustained before they transition to more on and off phasing, if that makes sense. Central Florida. So Matrix, yes. Earlier today, I took a lot of notes while I was on shift back at the Weather Center up here in Virginia. Central Florida, as you move from west to east, the entirety of the peninsula, closest to the west coast, we're talking anywhere between 60 to 75-mile-an-hour winds, depending on how much wiggling and wobbling this system does. Interior Central Florida, we're talking the Four Corners counties, any local counties that may border the Four Corners area, closer to the Orlando metro area, the attractions out there. We're looking at intermittent phases, especially with our stronger thunderstorms, of anywhere between 45 to 60-mile-an-hour winds. Some folks are going a little higher, depending on how far to the right this may try to wiggle, but I think we can comfortably sit around sustained winds of 35 to 45 miles an hour, sustained being consistent. It's going to be a windy day as this system passes off to our west, but then when we have our stronger feeder bands working their way through, naturally, as they're pushing that energy along, your winds are going to spike up to potentially low end hurricane force. The graph is an in-house model. Yes, correct. Fort Myers is not just getting rain. Fort Myers will start to see conditions go downhill first thing tomorrow morning as we wake up and start the day. I hope you're not working. I hope the kids' school has been canceled. If you have little ones in school that will be going in tomorrow, they should be canceled. I would imagine so. I haven't been looking at all that truthfully because I've been disconnected from Florida, but you will start to see storm surge creeping into that general area between 6 and 9 a.m., and it will only continue to transition up the coastline. So you'll receive this system first as we get started with tomorrow post sunrise, and then obviously it'll bleed further to the north to Sarasota, the Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg area, Clearwater, all the way up to our landfall site. Daytona Beach, LS Momo, Daytona Beach is actually looking pretty good. We're going to have to watch for that sporadic isolated water spout, if not isolated tornado risk. Some bouts of heavy rainfall as the bands work their way through. But the east coast of Florida is looking pretty low key for the most part. This is an expansive storm. I saw some folks in the comments mention that it's 400 miles in width. Luckily, that's not how expansive our strongest winds and our strongest impacts will be. So you will have a breezy day. It's going to be fairly overcast, fairly gloomy, an excellent day to stay inside, hunker down, as a few of us like to say. And you will be receiving a lot of onshore flow. So those winds will be ripping in off the coastline with that easterly flow around the right side of the system. If you think about it, the way it flows counterclockwise, so opposite the way a clock would tick, the winds are going to be coming in off the Atlantic coast there. So you will realize some pretty gusty winds throughout the day. Very rough seas, rip currents out there. Don't recommend being outside. It is not a good day to go hanging out and being touristy. It could tick east, but when I say tick, I mean just a nudge, a fraction. We're not talking a large slide to the right. We've been watching our steering positions or our steering current and the way our features are positioning themselves on the game board to the north of this system. And again, we're pretty confident in this track. And it's interesting to see that even National Hurricane Center is bumping it further west as opposed to keeping it right on into the greater Big Bend area of northern Florida. Let's see. Has the eye wall closed yet, Abby Stern? We're looking at the satellite right now. Not as of yet. It's still looking a little rough on satellite. We're getting some greater thunderstorm activity to fire up closest to the center. But right now, no, we're still looking at a fairly, it's symmetrical, but for all intents and purposes, it is still struggling. It's still a little disorganized. Port Charlotte area, yes, you're going to be seeing storm surge. I believe National Hurricane Center is predicting anywhere between 5 to 8 feet rolling in as we start the day tomorrow between 6 to 9 a.m. and going downhill from there is when those conditions will really start to deteriorate. You're also going to see your wind speeds going up around that same time, starting out in tropical depression, 30 to 40 miles an hour, getting into that tropical storm-like condition, especially as we get parallel with the system. If you think about it, we talked about this yesterday, the geography of the west coast of Florida angled like this. It's opposite you guys looking at the camera right now. But as we get parallel to the center of Helene, that's when those backside, the southern flank winds are going to be piling up the water, piling up the impacts right up along the coast of Florida. So throughout the first and into the early second half of tomorrow is when conditions are going to be rough. Robert Baker, I completely agree with you, buddy. We hope that this dry doesn't look like we have a very gratuitous dry air channel into the system right now. It looks like it's still trying to mix out what was bit into it earlier today, but I don't see as pronounced of a channel of dry air just simply funneling into the storm. Later on, when Jonathan comes back, I'll ask if we can possibly go back to maybe earlier this afternoon, earlier late in the morning around lunch today, and you can see a clear channel of dry air just wrapping up into the system, and that has definitely helped us. Sarasota, Mina, once again, and that's another thing, guys, for everybody asking questions in the chat in terms of specific cities, towns, if you're on the West Coast, you're going to feel pretty much the same type of impact unless you're much closer to our landfall location. So, anywhere along the West Coast, you will see storm surge. You will likely see flooding. You will definitely see tropical storm conditions. And as you go beyond Clearwater, further up into the greater Big Bend and northern Florida, the eastern half of the panhandle from Tallahassee all the way through to the northern Florida peninsula, that's where you're under your hurricane watches and your hurricane warnings, which means hurricane force conditions, sustained winds of 74 miles an hour and up are expected within 24 hours. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's definitely going to be calm in Orlando right now. We just have regular old banding coming through. It looks like we do have a feeder band getting ready to work its way onshore right now, just to the immediate north of Fort Myers. Venice Beach, Sarasota, and Tampa Bay will be receiving that here within the next hour or so, give or take. I'm seeing some pretty decent thunderstorm activity, just indicated by those cold cloud tops off our immediate west coastline. I know Miami had a swath of thunderstorms. Fort Lauderdale, West Palm had a nice swath of thunderstorms moving through maybe a little over an hour ago or so. So we're starting to see the conditions slowly, gradually going downhill. We're not at the point just yet where it will rapidly go downhill. My boss won't let a little hurricane stop the workday. I feel that. Navy's laughing at this right now. Cool for Jacksonville, but still being prepared here in Jacksonville? Yes. Jewel, absolutely be prepared up there. I have really close friends up there in Jacksonville, and I'm definitely letting them know you will likely see tropical storm like conditions and that onshore flow again. Water creates a lot less friction, and it doesn't do much to stop the level of intensity that we are expecting with the winds on the east side of the system. As you go further inland, naturally the land and the terrain, the buildings are going to shield you from the strongest winds. But if you're right there on the coast, St. Augustine, Daytona, Palm Coast, Jacksonville, etc., you're going to be receiving the full extent of the east side winds. They won't be very strong per se. They won't be damaging 40, 50 miles an hour sustained, but they will be rough because of the expansive nature of this system. St. Cloud, Jasenia, yes, St. Cloud is going to be under tropical storm conditions for much of the day tomorrow and into the early overnight hours of tomorrow evening, for sure, as well as that intermittent heavier rainfall as the bands come through and that tornado risk that we want to pay close attention to as well. Welcome back, Jonathan. Thanks for rejoining us, buddy.
Hey guys, thanks for holding down the fort.
Absolutely, trying to work through all the questions that I can. And it's not that I'm ignoring your specific location, folks. I promise you that. We just got to remember the Florida Peninsula is just that, a peninsula. So from west to east, impacts are going to vary west to east. Closest to the west coast, the worst impacts. Closest to the east coast, you're going to see a little less of what Helene has to offer.
Please post in the comments what is hype about this. I'm super interested because last time I checked, we were just talking about the weather. Just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you, Zuriel.
Yeah, tornado. I recognize that username as a matter of fact.
Interesting. So he gets troll of the live stream so far. That's gonna be we'll mark that down. Have to bust out the timeout feature for the live stream tomorrow. All right, let's
Jonathan,
see here.
I have a question in the chat right now. Alexander Destine, is there any way that we could swap from links and go over to actual Storm Prediction Center so we can pull up their graphics for the tornado, the winds, etc.?
You got it.
So we can get that up there for sure. Because I know that we have the 5% risk across much of our viewing area. And then it actually goes up with that onshore flow for Georgia and the lowermost portion of South Carolina. They have that 10% tornado risk where we could see supercellular activity working. There you go, working its way onshore off the Gulf Stream.
So yeah, and that's going to be where they might be a little bit stronger than what we're typical. I mean, think Beryl. That thing was not only prolific, but it had some big tornadoes, at least from a tropical standpoint, out that way in Texas and Arkansas and through the plains. That was a wild one for sure. And again, the wording from the Storm Prediction Center also pretty concerning when you're talking about tornado potential out of a tropical system.
For sure, guys. Yeah. So to sum it up once again, it's not that we're ignoring your local area. It's just very easy to just kind of bleed the threats together because it's such a big storm. Everybody is going to know that Helene is hanging out with us for the next 24 hours. So we can expect that a little bit of everybody has that risk, whether it be a low end, moderate, or as we can see here, a little more elevated for tornadoes. Our coastal areas, regardless if you're East Coast or West Coast, East Coast, that onshore flow going over those warm Gulf Stream waters could enhance the thunderstorms, make them a little more capable of producing water spouts that will then try to transition to tornadoes because of that onshore component. The West Coast, guarantee we're closer to the storm, a lot more of that turbulent mixing and wind shear to drop those tornadoes, those water spouts over open water. Hopefully, we can just watch them from afar, let them hang out over open water and just stay there. But regardless, everybody in Central Florida should make sure that they have a way to get alerts, whether it be for anything flash flood, roadway ponding, urban flooding, tornado warnings. They'll probably, do we have a tornado watch out yet, or is it still a little early?
I think still a little early. I've not seen any tornado watches for any part of the peninsula just yet. There is a super
Okay.
low end tornado risk until 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. You see it right there, just a 2%, not zero, but it's not as certainly as what it could be tomorrow.
Yeah, Jonathan and I were looking at the velocity on the radar earlier, and there is a little hint of some rotation in some of these more organized cells. So we're already starting to see those conditions ripen up a little bit, if you will, for tornado producers, especially with this system bearing down on us tomorrow. Somebody asked a very important question in the chat. Will this be a high end four or a low end four at landfall? There is a little bit of variability in that. During their teleconferences today from National Hurricane Center, they are openly admitting to all of us forecasters that they are willing to drop or, God forbid, increase that intensity before landfall. Right now, as of 5 p.m., we have a low end category 4 for landfall, but they are willing to adjust it if it does look like we're improving or unfortunately going further downhill with a potentially stronger system. We're not 100% locked in there yet. Where we stand currently, we're looking at a low end Cat 4.
And there are some of those storms coming through. And again, at that point, when you're talking about the size of it, and I mean, you can go back and forth here, and you can use Katrina as the example. It was once a Category 5. It did weaken due to an eyewall replacement cycle to a Category 3. I mean, again, a Category 3 is a major hurricane. Don't get me wrong here, but it was the size of Katrina that really helped to generate that extraordinary surge along the North Gulf Coast. We have a big time. This is going to be a very large storm as well. It's going to push a lot of water to that. Before we get into some of the Central Florida county by county stuff, I wanted to show you the surge graphic because uh, we mentioned this word last night. The Weather Service out of Tallahassee mentioned the word basically unsurvivable storm surge in the Big Bend region. I mean, this is crazy stuff right here where you see this purple popping up, 18 plus. Hurricane Center is forecasting 15 to 20 feet with the 5 o'clock update when they increase the intensity at landfall to Category 4. So nothing to play with. I don't mean to sound uh, dire or whatever. You're not going to survive that if you stay in those locations. Cat 4 coming through with 18 to 20 foot above actual tide. That is a nasty situation. Don't put law enforcement. I don't even think they would come and get you at this point. I know a lot of times they pull back, but they believe me that's it's in their DNA to go do that. Don't put their lives on the line to come rescue you for not listening to local officials. That's the biggest thing that we can say tonight is if your local official is telling you to go, get out of there. That's all we can say.
Exactly. Now, I can testify wholeheartedly the National Guard, the military, will not go in there. It is too risky for our assets and our personnel. And it's not anything against you guys. It's not to, quote, punish you or make you feel bad for not abiding by the evacuations. It is just too risky. It's called collateral damage. As a military member, I can fully give you the definition of that. It's triage on the battlefield. You got to make the difficult choices. If losing one means saving 10, we're going to opt to lose the one versus the 10. And I swear, I don't say that as in, that's what's going to happen. I swear, I'm not trying to talk about life, limb, etc. here, but that's just the way it works. That's what Jonathan is getting at. They're not going to purposefully leave you behind, but if it is too dangerous of a situation, we can't risk losing personnel or any of our assets or equipment out there in harm's way. And by the way, for those of you in the chat that have already mentioned the H word, hype, unsurvivable was written in the official discussion by National Hurricane Center. We're not just making that up. It's not a headline.
Yeah.
That's literally what they wrote in their forecast discussion for what's to come.
Exactly. They don't use that word lightly. We don't use that word lightly. It's really only used in the highest end of events, which this is expected to be. Unfortunately, I mean, again, we're hoping that dry air just gets in there and does its work, and all that stuff.
Pure video of Southwest Florida. Please quit treating us like children. That's not what we're doing. We're trying to thoroughly explain for everybody exactly what's going on. We refuse to use all of our sophisticated jargon and leave you guys hanging. So we're trying to break it down for the now almost 5,000 people in the chat. That's quite an audience from lots of different walks of life. So we're going to try to keep things as simplified and easy to understand as possible, respectfully.
So somebody mentioned before. Sorry, I did forget my headphones. That's why you're seeing feedback. So I'm gonna go get those. Somebody mentioned about the surge forecasts are typically overdone. That is a great point. The Hurricane Center does forecast for the high end, so they put worst case scenario. The model that I'm showing you here, this is from a company, QRisk. This model is doing what it thinks that the surge is going to be. This is the most realistic outcome. So again, I mentioned before that the Hurricane Center is forecasting 15 to 20 feet. This is forecasting 18 plus. So again, the model is this model right here is painting the most realistic picture, and all that stuff. So again, if you see this map, do not stay here. If you are in this area, I mean, and again, a lot of this is going to be coming whenever the sun starts to go down. Landfall is likely going to be around 7, 8 o'clock, give or take, tomorrow evening. And I mean, nightfall just makes everything worse. So, and Adam says he heard it might be coming in as a Cat 4. It's expected to now. That's the official forecast.
Correct. And I'm also seeing
And I mean,
folks asking
here's
if
the
you're
thing
in.
too. If it reaches Cat 5, this will be another Katrina. Katrina wasn't a 5. It was a 3 at landfall, and that's how much damage it did. So when you see those memes on there of like the different categories and how you react, I mean, each one is bad, each one is different, each one has their own hazards. Obviously, once you get to major status, they're called major hurricanes for a reason. We'll see. Skyline says, ain't no way it's going to be 18 feet. That is the mentality right there that gets people into trouble, and why David had that kind of warning for you about how it is, because we're not going to put our service members, or they're not going to put our service members at risk to come get you. I will tell you, it's pure physics. Look at how, let's bust out the telestrator for this. Look at how this bay works, Appalachia Bay. If you have a storm coming in like this, big storm, 130 mile per hour winds, where's that water going? It's literally going to pile up. Like it's just physics. And that's the thing. I know the other thing that people are the only problem with evacuating is you won't be able to come back for days, maybe weeks. Look, I can't speak to that I've never had to evacuate. I don't live along the coast. I can't imagine what that feeling has to be. So I sympathize with you there. I do. But man, when it's your life, if you're told to go, please just go. Like that's it. You can't replace that.
No, exactly. You're not going to get a respawn like some of the video games out there. And I've been seeing a lot of, because I have the chat pulled up beside me here on YouTube, streaming through my phone on mute. A lot of folks are asking about Tallahassee. Truthfully, with where we stand in terms of the track, the intensity is still a little up in the air. Right now, the official forecast, not from us, from the subject matter experts, the big brains at NHC, we're looking at a low end category 4 with stronger gusts outside of the sustained winds and the storm surge and the flood potential risk here that we're talking about, severe risk at that. If you have the means of withdrawing from Tallahassee safely and right now, then I would honestly suggest a friendly just recommendation if you have the easiest means of doing so. Not talking about hightailing up to Georgia or hightailing over to Alabama, Mississippi. You only need to go a couple miles further inland. That's from emergency management here in Florida. They don't recommend going hundreds of miles or road tripping out to Las Vegas, sarcastically. They just want you to withdraw from the coastline if you feel the need to do so, or if you are mandatorily required to do so to get out of harm's way. If you can safely do that, 30, 45 minutes, an hour north, further inland, you have relatives, friends, or a location in mind that you can shelter in place that might be a little sturdier than your home. Make sure everything's locked up. Grab your personal belongings, any pets, any medications, anything that might, be sensitive if lost. And yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We are not emergency services. We are subject matter experts. So please take that and do with it as you please. That's not an order or anything like that. But if you want my personal and professional opinion, if you can move a little bit further away from the coastline, those immediate major impacts, then yeah, I would suggest if you can do so safely, absolutely. But the time is now. Don't wait.
No, I mean that's a good thing, and I mean you'll probably have until early tomorrow morning, like till sunrise, because things will start going downhill for the Big Bend. I mean, through the course of the afternoon, I'll show you future radar again, so that we can give everybody a view of what's coming. But remember, with Beryl, that was only a Category 1 storm, and what it did to downtown Houston with the high rises there. And I know this isn't Houston by any means, but certainly this is going to be stronger than Beryl by a lot, at least at this stage of the game at Landfall, and um, and it's obviously closer to the water too, so it's not going to weaken as much as what Beryl did. And again, it's crazy. And somebody put in, let's bring this comment over here to kind of reiterate the storm surge. During Ian, the surge in Fort Myers Beach was definitely 12 to 15 feet. Houses floated away. I'm local. This is no joke. He nail on the head with that as you see some lightning still going on, and that's a look at Tallahassee, who we could take a direct hit from this thing. That is brought to you by our WeatherStem network of cameras here from WeatherStem. So great stuff going on with there that we're going to be able to bring you some live coverage from around the state of Florida tomorrow as this is all happening. So if you're interested in getting analysis from David and myself and other members of the Pinpoint Weather Team, real meteorologist, and that live look around the state as we have the hurricane making landfall, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button. Also give this a thumbs up. We're gonna schedule this for noon tomorrow so that you can kind of get into the waiting room so you can be notified whenever we go live. But we're going to be watching that closely, of course, as all things come in. But storm surge happens so fast. Like 1 minute it's relatively okay, and then that it comes in and the water takes everything. I know that sounds dramatic. I get it. Like when you hear this and you don't know anything about storm surge and how the water literally, think of it almost like a tsunami. It's not this generated the same way, but it's the water just lifts up and comes in, and it's not good. It's not good.
No, it's not. I'm seeing somebody in the chat copy and pasting a question. For Tallahassee, do you think it's going to be strong enough to destroy houses? If the forecast verifies and we have sustained winds of 125 to 130 miles an hour, Sustained. That's as if we have a giant fan capable of producing 125 to 130 miles an hour cranked up, blasting your house with intermittent gusts beyond that. Yes, we can confidently say that is enough to level buildings, relocate certain loose objects, and we're talking heavy loose objects. We're not talking just a lawn chair or a plant outside. This will do damage. This will definitely do damage. If the water doesn't get you on the immediate coast, the winds, especially since this system will be moving fairly quickly. With Ian, we love to make the comparison with this system. Ian, Central Florida, outside of the flooding, we lucked out. I distinctly remember Charlie in 2004, small storm, not as much flooding, but the winds were felt well inland. We had category 2 conditions easily in my home area in Kissimmee. Orlando, I remember watching the reporters at the Emergency Operations Center getting buffeted by category 1, gusting to category 2 level criteria. That's why, and someone mentioned in the chat earlier, every storm is unique. Every storm is different. If it's a slow moving storm, that water is going to be relentless. If it's a fast moving storm, you may not see as much of your inland flooding, but you can best believe that those hurricane conditions are likely to move a lot further ashore than they would like an Ian, where it had a chance to dissipate over the southwest corner of the peninsula to where in Polk County, where I lived at the time, we saw maybe tropical storm conditions, nothing too crazy. Everything was fine. In this case, this system is going to be boogalooing off to the north. So those category 3, 4, whatever criteria it is at landfall will likely bleed into southern Georgia and further beyond from there. So don't be surprised if there are intermittent hurricane conditions even well into interior Georgia, just to put it into perspective.
Great stuff there. Looks like we do have one Hurricane Hunter plane still in there. It's just left the center. Pressure at 973. Extrapolated. So that's a 974 that we got at the 8 o'clock advisory. And we'll see what happens when it makes the other part of its alpha pattern as it moves back along. So we'll keep a close eye on that as we go forward through the rest of the evening. For those tuning in on News 6 Plus, I want to go county by county for the greater Central Florida area real quick, and we're going to break this down at 11 o'clock. So if you are watching again from the greater Central Florida area, tune in tonight, News 6 at 11. If you're outside of the Central Florida area, download News 6 Plus. It's free on your smart TV, the Apple Roku, all that stuff, and you can get the latest advisory there. We're going to break everything down county by county and go into more detail again on the 11 o'clock news. Point blank, worst weather in Marion County and pretty much everywhere tomorrow is going to be Thursday, tomorrow, afternoon, and evening. Wind gusts 45 to 65 miles an hour. That tornado threat's going to be there. 4 to 6 inches of rain is going to be possible as we move further into the afternoon. Into Osceola County, a little bit lower of impacts. Still, gusty winds, 30 to 50 miles per hour. That tornado threat is going to be there. We'll be talking about 1 to 3 inches of rain. And we'll continue to pop in with different counties throughout the course of this live stream. And again, we're going to have it all wrapped up as we get towards 11 o'clock or at the 11 o'clock news with the advisory. David was mentioning this before, and in case you're joining late because all that stuff, man, I hope, okay, so don't do some of the advice that some people are suggesting in the chat. About all that stuff, about where to hide. Boy. Let's see here. Anyway, that's the latest forecast, and that's what David was talking about. Hurricane warnings up for Tallahassee, 130 mile per hour sustained wind storm coming in somewhere around the Big Bend or Eastern Panhandle.
Jonathan, if we have a spare second, I had two really good questions come in just now. Someone had asked, could you please explain pressure and millibars? And Jose had asked, can you elaborate a little bit more on storm surge? So with tropical cyclones, you hear a lot of us mentioning, yeah, there we go, Jose Ortiz. We'll get to your question just in a second, bud. For pressure and millibars, you're going to hear that terminology, that verbiage tossed around by NHC meteorologists far and wide. Pressure and millibars are our standard units, just basic units of measure, just like kilograms, grams, milliliters, liters, gallons, etc. Millibars are just the units of measure for atmospheric pressure, whether it be low pressure, high pressure, you name it, across the globe. That's how we categorize or classify our pressure. And pressure in this case, I know it might get a little complicated because we have so many things going on at once when we're tracking for hurricanes, tracking tropical cyclones. But in essence, the whole thing in a nutshell with a hurricane is low pressure. It's just another version of a low pressure on our planet that the atmosphere concocts. Reason we call them tropical cyclones is because they come up near the equator, 5, 10 degrees out there in the Atlantic, the Caribbean, etc. So that's why they're called tropical. With our low pressure systems that create the winter storms and the severe weather up over the Great Plains or up in the Northeast, those are called mid latitude cyclones. You see that? So mid latitude, they're further north, tropical down in the south. So pressure, that's just the actual, you could say, literally the mass of a cyclone, and then the millibars is just the unit that we use to measure that. Storm surge, Jose, to answer your question quickly, in layman's terms, it's just how much the water is going to rise above sea level. So if we have 10, 15, 20 feet of storm surge, if you have the water typically, we'll say 2 feet below, I don't know, a bridge, a walkway, hypothetically speaking, just something that you can use as a frame of reference. If it's 2 feet below that, whatever it is you're looking at, and you have 15 feet of storm surge, that means it's going to come up 13 feet above that. The water's just going to rise up, and you're going to be beneath 13 feet of water from where it was once sitting. Obviously, don't use the 2 feet. I'm just spitballing with you, trying to, give you something to use your imagination on. But that is essentially storm surge. It's just a rising of the water.
And there you go. And there's kind of the animation there, how it literally it finds the slope of the beach, and the water is just pushed up to it, and you see what it's doing there. I mean, the water is getting into that high rise just inland as well. There was another good question. Somebody asked in the chat, I was trying to find it to bring it over. Um, can you explain 0Z, 6Z, 12Z, 18Z, and so on and so forth?
You want me to take this one, Jonathan?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. You can take it, or I can do it if you want. Whichever. I know you're especially good with that stuff.
It's all good. I'll go ahead and if you want to add on to it, essentially 0, 6, 12, and 18, that's universal time. So this way, we actually talked about this on duty today up with the Navy here. It's just a way to compartmentalize the time across the globe. Obviously, as we know, for us East Coast folks, we're sitting at 9:30. Out where my family lives in Arizona, my immediate family, I believe, is going to be 6:30 in the evening over there. The different time zones. So the Zulu is universal time. Everywhere on the planet right now, it is approximately, I want to say it would be 0130Z. That would be the conversion from our local time. And 0, 6, 12, and 18 are just the cardinal hours where most of our computer model data will run. What's critical, and you'll hear a lot of us, like Jonathan and myself, talk about 0 and 12. That's also where across the globe, particularly the United States, we have all of our National Weather Service offices, everywhere with the capabilities of launching weather balloons and getting actual data in. That's critical for our computer models. So not only do we get fresh analysis data from the atmosphere, but at 0 and 12Z, that data gets put into our forecast models. And we've seen lots of advancements over the last several years, but usually 0 and 12 are, they're a little bit more confident in what they're putting out because they have all that fresh and raw data brought in from the actual atmosphere and they're run with it. Whereas 6 and 18, if the model does perform at that time, it's usually what's called a continuity run. It just kind of reruns what it was ingested earlier, what it was fed earlier, and just reproduces it for a new model run.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And she asked for Z, it's like you said, it's the same thing. It's universal time, or GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. That's what that's where the 0 starts overseas there. Good question here. It's funny that her name is Anti-Crystal because it's kind of like anti-cyclone and cyclone and stuff. But she's asking, do hurricanes always rotate the same direction? And if so, which side tends to present the worst wind? So good question. I'll have you start with that, David, because I'm going to bring in a quadrant graphic to kind of go over that. And the answer, it's different depending upon what hemisphere you're in.
Exactly. So hurricanes will technically, and I promise I'm not going to be as long-winded, hurricanes will technically spin the same way. It's just a matter of perspective and the kind of spherical nature of the Earth. So they'll still spin in the same direction, but if you flip the Earth upside down and you're now in the southern hemisphere, South America, Antarctica, Australia, etc., they'll spin anticyclonically just because you're on the opposite side of the earth. And as we know, we shrink the circumference of the globe closer we get to the poles. And where that switches, the just general physics, the movement switches, is the equator. You go to the southern hemisphere and everything changes direction because of the way the earth rotates, the spherical nature of the globe, and how our wind patterns will move across the surface of the earth. So they're still technically spinning the same way, but they're accommodating for the fact that now you're upside down more or less on the opposite end of the earth as opposed to what we're used to here in the northern hemisphere.
Good stuff. And I'm trying to find the graphic, and I might run out of time doing it, but it's always to the right of the center relative to the motion. So in this case, for instance, I'll bring it up and kind of show you. It's going to be split into quadrants. Can't illustrate on that one, so we're going to do it just right in here. We'll use the cone graphic. But if the storm is right, say the storm makes landfall right here, it's split into quadrants. In this right here, that right front quadrant, call it the dirty side of the storm, that's always, and that's because the motion is that direction. It gets kind of weird because, again, it's relative. So, like, for the sake of Andrew, that was coming in around here, draw the thing, and since the motion was that way, that was the dirty side of the storm. So it's relative to motion on the right front quadrant if you were to slice that thing in fours.
Yep, exactly. That pretty much wraps it up into a nice bundle, folks.
Let's see here. Let's see. I don't know. Okay, so he's asking why do most of the hurricane models show an eastern trend? The NHC is showing west. I don't know that
Let
they
me take a
are.
look.
Let me
I kind of
see.
see what he's talking about. Looking at the H wharf, looking at the halves A, they're all coming in east of the track right now. The track has Apalachicola Bay in the immediate crosshairs, whereas the halves A and B, the H wharf, and even the Euro and the GFS really do have the center making landfall on the right edge or on that right line of the forecast track, at least for 18Z. I just glanced at the 18Z suite.
Yeah, well, that I guess that makes sense. The GFS is the background state of the hurricane model. So if the GFS kind of wanted to go to the
Yeah.
east a little bit, that would kind of push the hurricane models to go there um, as well. So we'll see again if that's the start of a trend. I mean, again, that is well within the cone. I think anyway. I think it should be within the cone.
Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah, yeah,
Definitely. It's
yeah.
in.
Okay, I
It's within
just
the
wanted to
cone.
zoom in
It's
again. So
hugging the
yeah,
right side of it, but it's inside.
yeah, and that's the reason why the cone is there again. And again, at this point, because it's gonna be a massive storm, there is going to be a lot of stuff going on. It's going to take you're still going to get impacts. The wobble is just going to see who's going to be like who's going to get the worst of the worst.
Yeah, I'm looking at the satellite right now, and it looks like we're still fighting to mix out that dry air, but
Good.
the hot towers are definitely getting going. The diurnal maximum is going to try to give this system a fighting chance, a vote of confidence. So we shall see. Still looking a little raggedy, but I don't know. And also, I'm not too, Jonathan, how much time do we have left?
We'll probably rock this until maybe like 15, 20 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Because somebody had asked a question way earlier in the stream. Well, they didn't ask a question. They actually, I guess, they bought into the it's Jover and canceled the season. And they said we thought hurricane season was over. So per the calendar, the season
Uh,
runs until November 30th. And if I'm being honest, and we're not going to pull this up, we have a very credible threat here that's going to be impacting us for the next 24, 30 hours. But just know that the new six pinpoint team is watching closely what the tropics are going to try to produce as we go through the month of October. I know the tropical hazards chart from CPC just released, and they're still giving us a above 40% chance of tropical cyclone development close to home as we go through the first 2 weeks of October. In fact, Jonathan, I think you should be able to pull that up at least. Take a look at the hotspots during the first 2 weeks of August from CPC.
Let me pull that over.
All right. And then the reason I bring this up is, again, we're going to be very, very closely watching the tropics during this fragile state that Florida is going to be in for the next probably week or two, give or take, once Helene is all said and done and we can get recovery efforts fully 100% in full effect. We're going to still be watching the Atlantic. It looks like our next areas of interest, not only the one that's on the board now, with a 80% chance of development, I believe, over the next 7 days. That's going to fish out. No harm nor foul. It's the one beyond that that we're going to be keeping a close eye on, as well as a lot of our long range ensembles are indicating we could have, in the same general source region, another storm try to spin up where Helene manifested itself a couple of days ago. So we're going to have to keep our head and eyes on a swivel, most definitely. The hurricane season is not over, and it's very bizarre to see such a backloaded peak like this to where it's honestly performing more than it has all season long. Here you have it, ladies and gentlemen, October 2nd through October 8th. You can see we have two generous hotspots brought to us by CPC, and then even into the next week after that, the 9th through the 15th, still watching that area in the Bay of Campeche in the Western Caribbean. And the only reason I bring this up, it's because Florida now has received two hurricanes. This will be its second hurricane. Louisiana, Mississippi, we just dealt with Francine, and we all know where Beryl went back in July. So a little bit of everybody has felt what this hurricane season has had to offer. And if anything else forms close to home like that, dare I say it, the writing's on the wall. Somebody else is going to have another repeat. God forbid it be Florida or anybody on the immediate Gulf coastline. So, despite how much we're working to dial in Helene, just understand that we are still watching you guys' back from afar and watching the signals that may be trying to transpire as we get into spooky season and we get to the first half of October.
Absolutely. So we're going to continue to monitor that as well. Let me get back to the weather computer. We're still watching some lightning going on in Tallahassee. And again, this is just all kind of ahead of Helene. This is like not really the outer bands just yet. We might have one of those gnarly ones in Southwest Florida, but like this is just straight up onshore flow ahead of induced by the storm. But it's, I mean, it's not even part of what's coming at this point in Tallahassee.
No, and actually, you make a very valid point, Jonathan. What you guys are seeing up the eastern seaboard, it was even influencing our weather up here in the east side of Virginia. That is our steering system. That is the trough and that upper low that's sinking south. That's what's helping to magnetize Helene forward and to the north, and what's going to draw it into the Big Bend area. So, for those of you still asking in the chat, is this going to swing over to Alabama or is this going to swing down towards South and Southwest Florida? No, we're just about locked in. The steering current, the overall atmosphere is behaving itself and cooperating to where we shouldn't see any dramatic curveballs thrown from this system or from Mother Nature from here on out. We're waiting and watching. There's only so much forecasting you do at this point. This is just, the waiting game now. We just got to get through it all together.
Yeah, we do. And I'm just looking for.
Oh, Jonathan, I can't hear you anymore. Let's see. I'll keep talking to fill in the space, folks, while Jonathan troubleshoots his mic. Looks like we had an accidental muting. No harm, no foul. Just saw the post from the guy saying the IBM model is showing the storm going to Cedar Key, Gainesville. Meteorologist from Fox 35 Orlando. See, there is still that potential for it to move to the right. again, the forecast is set, the steering is in place, and the big bend in its entirety is where this system is going. So to see it jog far to the right, we would still need a few larger scale mechanisms up over the Great Plains, up over the Mid Atlantic, the Appalachians to switch their configuration a little bit. Is it doable? Yes. Is it the most likely outcome? Not at the moment.
Yeah, and that thing is, I bumped my mic and I think the cord came out, so I had to reset the settings. So thank you for rolling through that.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
Yeah, that's so far out of the realm, and we were talking just a little bit ago about the Eastern shift. That thing would have to come so far in. I wish I had the graph to show you. I do not have that I don't have access to that model, but um, to reference the cone, this is for those that haven't seen the posts. The graph has it like coming in like this, pretty much. Maybe up like into here. It's in this region. Is it possible? I guess. Let me look. Let's look at some of the. But I mean, look at that. The graph would be like, I mean, Cedar Key, Crystal River
Far to the right, yeah.
is right here. I mean, to see that's such a huge turn, that would be so unlikely. So unlikely. I personally wouldn't even wouldn't even show that because I wouldn't agree with it. At that point, because here again, here's kind of the rival to the graph, which does very very well with south to north moving storms, and it has it. There's again, we got to watch that guy here in the morning. You see that little nub, that little kidney bean?
Oh, yeah.
That's a supercell, by the way, squirrel. And then, I mean, again, Crystal River is right about in here, give or take. We're talking a long ways away from that. So, I mean, again, nothing is impossible. I mean, maybe a landfall in Texas is impossible, but like, you get my drift. It's like David mentioned it's super unlikely that's going to happen. I personally wouldn't be showing that because it's such an outlier. What my guess is that because he's in Central Florida, he wants to kind of show the worst case scenario for Central Florida. Um, that's going to be my guess with that. So I would caution it to be quite honest with you. Um, that's why I think he's doing it. I know who you're talking about, and I that's why I think he's doing it. In my personal opinion.
No, and you're probably right, and that makes sense just to kind of cover everyone's bases, show what the worst that could happen would look like, and then naturally kind of double down on best case scenario and hope for that to be the most viable outcome.
Some people are saying a lot of people talking about Andrew and Homestead when Andrew hit. That must have been rough. Let's see here. I mean, that's good. Someone's about Atlanta shutting down the city in preparation. Atlanta's going to get it rough. I mean, this thing is going to come in racing. It is. I mean, we're talking about potentially popping a hurricane force wind gusts in Atlanta. Outside shot there to get those gusts near 75 miles an hour. Um, that somebody mentioned that just I was just about to make that analogy. Um, they comparing Atlanta to Beryl to Houston's Beryl. Can certainly see
Oh
that
yeah,
possibility because at that point we still might have a Category 1 hurricane because of its size. Those tend to weaken slower, and its forward speed is going to be crazy fast.
exactly. Very much so. So I'm noticing that there's a lot of folks pointing out in the chat as well that a lot of our high res models are indeed to the right of the forecast track. And there's always a method to the madness with what National Hurricane Center puts out. And with that being said, let's not focus too much on the cone and where the eye is going to go. Just understand what you guys are pointing out, that there is still a risk that this could swing to the right of Tallahassee and come in potentially closer to your local area. So instead of really focusing on why is National Hurricane Center doing this, understand what it is that you're interpreting and recognize, okay, that means that there is a shot that I could be under the worst weather, if not worse weather than what is currently forecast. And just again, heed the threat, respect the storm.
So there's one of them. This is the halves B, and the halves B did very, very well. It's the leading track model of 2024 right here, and at least from the hurricane bases, the hurricane model that we have out there to use. And I mean, there it is. It has it kind of right around the Perry area, right towards the central part of Appalachia Bay. So that is the halves B. We'll take a look at the halves A. It's maybe a little bit further to the east. It has a weird oblong eye. That's kind of weird. We'll take a look at the HMON. HMON's a little west, kind of right in line with the center line of the cone. Let's take a look at the H Wharf.
Jonathan, in the chat, I had a friend of mine join the live stream, username PM. He's requesting moderator privileges, standard moderator, just so we can hopefully rein some of the
Get some
comments in
people
if that's
out.
okay.
Absolutely. And if he's on tomorrow, because we're about to sign off, I'll try to give him that stuff so that he can do that. And I'll try to find him in the chat. But yeah, it is getting a little out of control. So I apologize for that, guys. So yeah, and honestly, with that,
And
we'll
as we,
oh, go ahead.
no, go for it, go for it.
No, I was going to say with that, we'll probably end up wrapping this up. I got to get on TV in about 5 minutes. Got to get ready for that. And then we'll look into getting that the moderator set up for tomorrow's extended live stream. And just to remind everybody, if you are interested in some extensive coverage tomorrow, as Hurricane Helene gets closer to Florida and impacts most of the peninsula, and then big time the Florida Panhandle, Big Bend region, hit that subscribe button. We're going to start a live stream tomorrow at noon Eastern time. We're going to have live cameras from all up and down Florida, including the Landfall site tomorrow, so we can see in real time what's going on. And of course, David and myself are going to be on hopping in from time to time throughout tomorrow to do to provide a lot of insight as to what is going on with the strengthening or weakening. We hope weakening, but in all likelihood, it's going to be strengthening into it. And just some of the impacts to give you guys a heads up, another resource. So again, look for that stream to go live at noon tomorrow. If you enjoyed this live chat, I wish we were talking about other stuff other than a major hurricane coming towards Florida. But nonetheless, if you found this informative and you kind of liked having the weather conversation tonight, hit that subscribe button wherever you're watching, either on the Just Weather page or the Click Orlando page. And if you don't have New 6 Plus, download that as well. It's a great resource to stay up to date on all these things. You know, we get storms all the time, so we got you covered. So please hit that subscribe button, and we'll catch you tomorrow. David, do you have any other final thoughts before we sign off and give this a go tomorrow?
Not too much. In summary, key takeaways. We have Helene Clay. Tomorrow morning at sunrise, are going to start going downhill for the bottom 1/3 of the peninsula. That's going to include potential isolated severe weather, tornadic activity, elevated winds, heavy rainfall, and then the storm surge along the west coast. Conditions are only going to just continue to move up the coastline with time. So if we're looking at 6 to 9 a.m. for the deep South Florida Peninsula, 9 to 12, 12 to 3, 3 to 6, etc., up until landfall at approximately 8 p.m. up there in the Big Bend. Across the spectrum, everybody out there watching right now, everybody's going to feel this storm. Everybody should be prepared for the potential for isolated flooding in your area, high winds, potential damaging winds if you're closer to the west side of the Florida Peninsula, and that isolated tornado waterspout threat as we go through the next 24 hours tonight and through to tomorrow night. Just going to kind of hit everybody on the money, and then these threats are going going to extend up into Georgia and the southern periphery of South Carolina, as we showed you on the Storm Prediction Center graphics earlier in the live stream. But that's all I got, guys. We'll see you again tomorrow. Please stay safe out there and just keep up with these updates, whether it be from us or another trusted weather source out there in your local area. Just best believe you got a lot of folks in your corner riding this out with you.
That's right. And again, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Post in the comments if you hit that subscribe button. After you hit the subscribe button, we'll see you tomorrow, noon Eastern. We got you guys covered with the best meteorological insight that you're going to find on YouTube. And of course, we're going to give you live looks of what's actually going on out there in real time. Hit that subscribe button. We will catch you tomorrow. Thanks so much for being with us, with us. We really enjoyed the conversation. We'll catch you then. Hit that subscribe button. We'll catch you soon.
Have a good night.